It's Don here from the board. Thanks for coming along and checking out this video. Today I'm going to be having a look at a 2-watt mini laser engraver. Now, this is a little bit unusual for me in the context that normally when I get reviews and products like this, I tend to open them up as part of the review so we can have a look at the packaging and the contents and things like that and give it a bit of a run. And today's video is a little bit different because this is actually the 4th video that I've recorded for this particular device. Now I'm actually going to have links to part 1, part 2. I'm not going to have the 3rd video because that was really just a short video that I'd done for the suppliers to see if they could help me out what was going on, and then this is obviously part 4. Now for a bit of background context, this unit was provided to me by Banggood, and everything that I say here, of course, as always, is purely my opinion, my experiences, and I'm not being paid for this review at all. And very shortly you'll probably see why I'm, pretty honest in regards to that aspect. So because I've already done part 1 and part 2, and like I said, I'll have video links below. They're not actually published, they're just they are published, but they're unlisted videos because they're quite long. First part was quite long, second part was a little bit more of an update, and I wanted to do this part 3 only because I'd ironed out all the actual issues at hand and I have a relative grasp of what is now going on with this machine. So let's switch over to the actual desktop and have a quick look. So this is really more of a closer to a too long didn't watch kind of scenario. So essentially what you get in the kit is this. This is the actual engraver itself with the plate attached to it. You'll see that that's the actual laser engraving module there, and then it has a sort of stepper motor assembly and carriage. This piece of cardboard I've actually stuck on myself because that side was not shielded. I deliberately shielded it because the way that my study is set up, if I have this running, I don't want my daughter potentially coming in and seeing the beam, even though it's a directed down beam, if it's reflecting off surfaces, because it can potentially be very damaging to your eyesight, being too wide. The front, being faced towards me, it has the shielding, so it's not an issue. And you'll notice on the desk, on the side, I've actually got a USB desk fan here to provide ventilation. While the actual unit has a fan, this is not useful. It moves air, but it doesn't move air to cool the actual laser. Now, I'm not going to go to the product page because you'll see that on the part 1 video if you go and check it out. But essentially, it tells you it's not a commercial unit, which is fine. And it also tells you that after about 20 minutes, you need to let it rest. And even though I'd sort of already seen that when I was looking at it, it didn't really trigger me because I didn't know what that actually meant. And you'll see in part 1, part 2, it hadn't really kicked in when I was doing that, but essentially the laser will stop. The unit will turn on and do its thing, and then it will stop. And there's no way for you to resume that particular burn. So if you get halfway through something and it stops, you can't do anything about it at all. You can't resume it like you might say in a 3D printer because you've actually got a G-code that you can identify where it stopped, and then you can go back to it. Now, this is a really big deal because so I started doing this to understand what the results were of this device, and you'll see halfway through that letter A, it stopped. Now, I can't actually even perfectly realign it back to that point and try and continue because it's going to start from the top again, and it may potentially stop on the way through. But I'll get to this in a moment. So the second issue that I discovered that you'll see if you look at part 1, part 2, is that the power supply for this is problematic. So this is the actual power adapter for it. And if you actually read this, it tells you it's a 100 volt AC to 240 volt AC 50-60 hertz. So I put an adapter on it. I put it into 240 because that's the power supply here in Australia. It boots up, but then it doesn't actually work. And it wasn't until I tried later on with a 240 to 110 power adapter that it actually did work. So despite the fact that this actually says you can use 240, you can't use 240. So if you're going to get one of these, you need a 110 power supply. So that's one thing that you have to be very aware of. Thankfully for me, I have a 110 power supply that I can use, and it does work. So there's two aspects. One, you got about 20 minutes of burn time from cold. If you've been using this for short amounts of time, it's not directly cumulative because you'll have time in between where it does get to cool down. But if you're going to do it from a straight hit, the longest I actually got it to do a run for was 23 minutes, and then it stopped. So before I actually do anything with this, this is where I want to get into it, and I will show you the actual software that I managed to get working with it. And it is this. Now I've just imported a logo which is nice and clean. It's one of my local keyboard suppliers. Shout out to Reese from Daily Clack for being awesome. And the software here, you'll see laser power adjustment, and it goes from 0 to 100, and depth of engraving from 1 to 100. Okay, so these are the parameters that you can play with pretty easily. And well, there's this contrast ratio thing which I haven't messed with at all. I've chosen to just leave it default, appears to be in the middle. I have played with black and white, and I tried discrete engraving as well, and unfortunately my discrete engraving didn't get very far because it timed out and overheated. So so that's a bit of a problem. Now if we have a look at this grid, I've gone for 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 for laser power. So that's just 0 to 100 times 10 of the unit. And then the depth, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Once again, going by that times 10 factor. And you'll see that the results that you get really are quite interesting in that a very weak laser power, even though you're getting quite a long depth, doesn't do very much at all. Realistically, this depth of engraving is actually how fast the beam is moving across your actual image. Okay, and I'll read out the times for that very shortly. But as you can see, once you get to 40% laser power, 60%, 80, 100, despite the fact that you're moving quite slow in the 20% depth range, you're actually getting quite good results. And when you go to double that to the 40, the results get dark very quickly to the point where, you know, once you start sort of hitting that 60 point, 80 point, it's very similar to the 100. When you get even down to 60% depth at 40, you're already getting to that sort of, you know, 80 point here. And I just didn't bother going any further because realistically, looking at the quality of the burn, there's no value in doing this higher depth of engraving. The reason why this is the case is because I was noting down how long it took to do a single letter A. Single letter A. And so here's my dodgy matrix, and the markers here is minutes/seconds. So with a depth of 20%, power doesn't matter, right? It's 3 minutes 32. Then for 40, 6 minutes 16. For 60, 8 minutes 59. And at 80%, it's 11 minutes 43. So keep that in mind that you've only got about 20 minutes of burn time. You don't really want to be spending half your burn time engraving at 80 depth. Because even at 20 depth, that gives you approximately 6 units, less than 6 units, realistically 5 units, right? 5 letters. Now, of course, the actual engraving size is only 8 centimeters. It's 80 by 80 mil, right? So if I get a ruler Here's my ruler, and you'll see that's just about the size of the box that I've got going here. So you could probably do 5 letters if you're lucky at depth 2. So going to the deeper depths, unless if you're doing something quite small, within about a 10 by 10, you're going to run the risk of not completing your burn. And that's even running it from cold. Okay, so for me, I would say that 80 to 100% on 2 for plywood works really well. Now, if I flip this over, you'll get to see some of the other things that I was trying to play with. And this is essentially playing with the same kind of things and testing how well the actual detail picks up. And this is an example of the 23-minute run where it just stops and you can't do anything about that. So I just want to switch over to the front-facing camera and try and give you a better sense of what it's capable of doing. And you'll see this is actually quite visible detail, because you'll see the words, the board is really, really clean for what it is, because you're burning on plywood here. And the resolution is fantastic for what this is and what it promises that it can do. So I got to thinking, what else can I do with this? And well, we're in keyboards. So besides customizing, maybe monogramming wrist rests, why not keycaps? So here is I believe it's a ABS DSA from a Signature plastic grab bag. And here is, if it'll let me show you, maybe it won't. Wasn't quite sure how that would turn out because there's not a lot of great light sources, but if I can get this to work. Ooh. There is a letter A, and that letter A is laser engraved, melted, but laser engraved onto the top of this DSA keycap. I was really excited because, well, if it could do the letter A, what else can it do? So I got a second keycap, and then I did this. So I know that the lighting's not fantastic, and I'm not holding it very steady, and the focus isn't doing a great job, but that is about an 8mm by 8mm version of our logo. And the letters, the board, is distinguishable. The microphone detail is distinguishable on top of this DSA keycap. So the resolution is actually really fantastic for what it is, for what it's trying to deliver, if you consider the limitations of the fact that you've only got 20 minutes to play with this thing. So that's some really positives there. Now, I'm actually going to turn this on and we're going to check it out. And what we're going to do is we're going to try and burn the Daily Clack logo onto another keycap. So I was able to figure out that the height of my 10mm boards that I've got here it's close enough to the actual height of the keycap. Now I know it's actually a little bit short, but for the purposes of the laser focus, it's actually decent. And I do want to say it's very important to focus the laser, and you need to use this bit of black laminated, well, not laminated, it's just glossy card, because if you try and focus it any other way, you won't get a very good result. So it is focused. I haven't messed with it, so in theory it should work. I do want to mention, electrically speaking, the actual internal circuit here is not well designed because, and I'm going to show you this. So they give you this USB cable. Oops. So they give you this USB cable, and this one's special because it's actually got a really long head on it. You need the long head to get into the actual socket. I tried to use a normal cable that I already had plugged in, and it didn't work because it wasn't long enough. So I'm going to plug this in, and you will see that's the laser for positioning. Okay, now at this point in time, here is the actual power plug. It's not plugged in. Here's the power plug. Here's the other end of it, right? So you're gonna have to trust me that I'm not playing any games here. So I'm gonna hold this right here, okay, so you can see that it's not plugged in, right? And there's a blue indicator light on the back here. So watch what happens. Okay, I'm gonna switch cameras now. So here it is, right? So this is the whole thing, and you'll see the cable is there, right? So here's the blue light on the back of this plug. And I'm being very careful now, because when I plug this in, why is the LED on my power pack turning on? So is that got 5 volts on it right now? Not cool. So just be aware, be careful. The correct order of operations is that you should be plugging this into your power first, then plugging it into the device. Otherwise, you may have a electrical hazard. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you that right now. That's a risk. So I've plugged it into my transformer. Now I'm going to plug it into the side here, and so this is where it gets really interesting, because so this is the dot, and you might be able to hear how noisy the fan's going right now because the fan's blowing at the back. When I turn on the 110, the fan boosts, and I can't remember if the dot gets a little bit brighter, but you can check it out. No, so the fan just gets a little bit louder. So the dot doesn't, but now I'm going to swap over, and so we can attach the device. It's now connected, and we can move it. So we always zero it. Okay, so it's just gone and zeroed it. And if we actually have a look at it, you'll see the laser is now moved to this rear corner up the top. So what I want to do now is I'm going to lift this, and I'm going to prop. So you'll see that's the actual purplish laser. Okay, so I'm going to prop this up so it gives me a bit of that space. I'm going to get my keycap, and I'm going to put it somewhere in the middle, roughly. Okay, so you can't really see that very well where the keycap is, but maybe I can shine a bit of light to. Okay, so you can see the keycap there is now positioned roughly there, and it's roughly square on. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to turn my torch off. Okay, so I'm going to turn on my USB fan now, and then I'm going to use the actual positioning of this to get it on top of the keycap. And I can use the jog buttons to move it in its relative increments, and then I can use the frame positioning to try and frame where that is going to be. Okay, so I'm just going to let that cycle at the moment, and I'll see if I can show you. There we go. So you can see it's actually circling the surface of that keycap. Alrighty, so we're going to stop that positioning, and I'm going to set it up so it's at 60% engrave depth at 100% laser power, because that was what I used before and it worked. So fan is on, device is on. Okay, so laser is off because it's sort of fallen off the top of that, and hopefully I'm not going to engrave my desk right now. And here goes nothing. And now it's trying to do its thing. So I can already see that it's doing something. I want to show you that as the software goes, you'll see that it starts showing red bits, because that's what it's actually engraving, and you'll see this is the time ticker that is running along to tell you how long it's been burning. So I'm just going to keep talking. I don't want to, leave dead time. I may or may not speed up this section. We'll see how it goes. But going by that 60%, well, it might be a couple of minutes. Obviously, it's going to make this video a lot longer, but this is the reality of what you're actually going to be experiencing and doing. Now, that light intensity is quite good, and I'll see if I don't expect the torch is going to cause a problem, but yeah, you can't really see on the screen here what's actually happening with the keycap, but as it's burning, I can see from the actual reflections that it's making the etching that is actually happening on that keycap. So where does this put us in terms of how useful is this hobby device? So for the purposes of customization, for personal customization, it's pretty good. I mean, I don't know what the actual sale price will be if you were going to have a look at this and buy one, but if you want to do small things, small scale things, small runs, monograms, maybe custom keycaps for a bit of fun, it's definitely possible. Are you going to be able to use this for commercial? 100% no. The other aspect is, because this laser is an LED driven laser, there's a very big limitation on what it can and can't melt. For example, I tried to do white paper just to see what would happen, and white paper did not work. It was actually either too reflective or the light passed through it. And what I discovered was, if it was just straight blank white paper, it was ablating the surface, because under very bright light you could see that it had actually blasted a thin layer off it. But when you hold up the piece of paper, you can't see anything at all. You can't even feel the texture difference. But it had taken such a small amount of thickness of it that under very bright lights you could see it, which was really, really weird. But then I was still messing around with it, and I had laser printing on the other side of the piece of paper, and it burnt holes in it. And it made me realize the laser was passing through the paper, but then the energy was being absorbed by the laser printed material on the other side and causing it to burn that hole. So white, not so great. Now, I had some cardboard, and I tried the same thing on the cardboard on the white, and it didn't do anything. But under the lights, it did the same thing, in that it had ablated that surface, a very thin layer of it, but it hadn't burnt it. It hadn't actually turned it brown or black. But on the other side, you could get, and this is just corrugated, you can actually burn stuff onto it. So we were memeing on Discord, and this was Toasty's Discord face, and this is Reese's Discord face as well. Kind of looks a bit like a cat, but anyway, what was happening with this was it was actually burning through it to the point where you can see the actual cavernous space behind there was getting slightly charred. So it kind of punched out a hole while it was actually trying to burn the images that I had on it. So, and I don't know if it's going to come across very well, but for Fatty's Discord icon, if it'll focus, it may not. Wait. Okay. That is actually a hole. Like, it actually goes in behind it. So it's kind of created almost like a cutout diorama, which is actually really cool. So if you wanted to do something like that small scale and you had it planned out very well on the burn intensity and it wasn't going to burn through the other side of the cardboard, you could probably get some really cool effects. But of course the limiter here is still the fact that you've only got 20 minutes of burn time before it stops. Now, what does that mean? Well, you could build a rig and you could discreetly cut up your image into blocks of 20-minute burn time, and you could set your material in the right place with a grid layout and everything else and use the positioning and do it almost like, you know, a jigsaw, right? Burn this section, let it cool off, burn this section, let it cool off, burn this section, and compile a whole image. If you wanted to do long strings of text and sentences, once again, plan out, block your letters, and then burn them in blocks. So it's not that it's impossible, it's just going to be a lot of effort. However, what's the payoff that's happening here is, well, it's small, it's relatively portable, it sits on your desk easily, it doesn't require big, large, clunky device or cooling. I mean, I've got a fan here, but you know, it's really not providing an immense amount of cooling because it's obviously not helping the laser stay on for longer than 20 minutes anyway. So there are things that you can do with it. You can have a bit of fun with it, you can do some GIFs, but you're certainly not going to be running any group buys, that's for sure. Now at the moment we're about halfway through the logo. It's been 7 minutes and 8 seconds, so we'll just check in on that. It's still running, we're about halfway through. Okay, and let's see if, now that I've got half of the logo done, if my phone torch can actually bring up sufficient light to see that something's happening. Okay, so the focus isn't working for the camera, but I can definitely see it with my eyes because my eyes are better than the webcam. But if we hang in there for another, you know, number of minutes, we might actually be able to get there. So yeah, I guess I should draw my conclusions now, which I've kind of already done anyway, while we wait for this. But it does what it says it's meant to do. It will burn stuff. It will burn darkish materials. It will burn paper-ish, you know, cardboard paper. It'll do plywood. It'll do some plastics. I wouldn't even bother trying metals at all because that's just going to not do anything. It's very easy to set up. All I had to do was install a driver and use the actual software that came on the USB stick. It's one file. It didn't trigger any of my antivirus kind of stuff, so I guess it was probably okay. The actual kit comes with some scrap material that you can play with, so it's got some plywood and cardboard and stuff like that for you to play with until you get more of your own. And of course the all-important focusing card. So if you don't focus it correctly, then, as I didn't do in the earlier videos, then you're not going to get very good results anyway, regardless of the fact that it wasn't working. I think the really big negatives is the fact that electrical safety seems to have not been a primary concern, especially if the USB power supply is lighting up your AC adapter. And the fact that it can't run on 240 through the adapter. Now, if you had a different adapter that fit the same plug and was able to provide the supposed 12 volts that it needs, then sure. But I don't have something like that to test. I'm only really interested in testing the native unit, as it were. The other things that I find really interesting is there's these buttons on the top here. I don't know what they're for. So I haven't tried them. I didn't really feel I had a need to try them because, so these buttons here that I'm talking about, because the software does all of that for you, and you can see there, and you don't have to press it and potentially move the actual alignment. You can just, you can just use the actual software to do its thing. You can see how bright it is because the actual reflection off my white table is showing up on the fan. Just the scattered light that's coming off the actual table and the keycap, because there's an annulus from the interference rings from the actual focus that's hitting the table and coming off. So yeah, we're about probably 60%. We're now at 10 minutes 54. So it's a matter of if this is actually going to make it in 20 minutes. Now, I just want to talk about some of the other things that have been happening here on the Bored Podcast and YouTube and whatnot lately. I do want to say thank you to all of our Patreon supporters and those who've been hanging in with us. Recently, we've hit 2,500 subscribers on YouTube as well. So it was kind of a milestone that came and went, in that we didn't really celebrate it. I didn't have anything suitable for giveaways, competitions, and so on and so forth. I can't really apologize for that because that's just how it is. But I hope that maybe when we get to 3,000 subscribers, I'll definitely be able to have something available to do for that. Now, stickers ideas are also progressing. We've had a bit of engagement within our local community. Some people come up with, some sketches. I still don't have any official art that's out for the stickers, but I am putting some money away slowly, bit by bit, with assistance from our Patreon supporters, of course, the excess from our hosting fees, to actually make stickers a reality. So I really want to make sure that that project goes through. In regards to other projects that I've been working on, I do get asked about what's happening with the Dam Bubble because there hasn't been any updates really of note, and part of that is I'm still waiting for the box pink switches to come in through Novelkeys. However, with all the controversy of KBD fans and the T1 switches, I'm also trying to get hold of some T1 switches so I can check them out and review them, because I do have some V2s that I can compare them against. So that'll be something really interesting. Yeah, and that's pretty much, I think, the majority of the things that have been happening around in the keyboard space for me directly. In regards to the podcast, we're still going strong, even though my co-host Kevin's kind of taken a bit of a break to, get his affairs for work-life balance working and sorting out some of his health, because it's quite stressful, of course, moving to a different country and starting a new job and everything else. But if you haven't been checking out our episodes, we've actually been really lucky lately to have been able to get a number of different guests come on and do interviews. So that's been really good. I hope that we'll be able to continue to, get interesting people over time. But of course, if you want to come on and if you want to be part of our podcast show, please get in contact with me and shoot me an email at theboredpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you. Now, of course, if you want to hang out with our community, we've got about 90 odd people in our Slack. Most of them are lurkers. We do have a small core number of active people who like to talk about keyboards. Well, you can send me an email as well to that same email address, and I'll get an invitation for our Slack group to you so you can come hang out. Yeah, I think that covers the majority of it. And of course, while we're still waiting for this to do its thing, we're at 14 minutes and 14 seconds now. I feel like it's a talking marathon, like I'm trying to fundraise, right? But if you've somehow come across this and you want to see more keyboards about product testing related to keyboards, or if you want to see keyboard reviews and things like that, then of course please hit that like button, please hit that share button, please subscribe, because all of that helps. Oh, it stopped. Oh, it stopped. No. Wow. Okay, so it stopped at about 14 minutes and 20 seconds, but check it out. The timer is still going because it doesn't know it stopped. And this is exactly the same issue that I had before. We haven't even hit 20 minutes. Haven't even hit 20 minutes, right? So if you're starting from cold, this is the risk that you run, because I was engraving at 60. So I'm going to stop that now because there's no point doing anything else. But we just got to the bottom and we missed out the word daily and the word clack. So I'm going to disconnect that because there's no point. It will probably take half an hour for this thing to cool down, and of course I won't be able to restart where it stopped. So I guess now is the time to check out what is actually being the fruit of our labors. Let's just turn the fan off. Let's unplug the mains power. It's much quieter. We'll unplug that, and voila. So you'll see it definitely did something. Now my alignment on the actual keycap wasn't fantastic because I didn't really have a rig or anything prepped for it. You can sort of see that in the light reflection. But what I'm going to do there is relegate the box to the side. We'll try putting this back in front, and then check it out this way. So look at that. So it did a bang up job in the fact that it was able to replicate quite well what we were trying to achieve, but the laser life, well, the heating really is the big issue. Okay, so we didn't even hit 20 minutes and it gave up the ghost. But I'm going to say that it did at least complete the main logo. So there you go, a very unique daily clack keycap, slightly rotated, but some effort went into that nevertheless. There we go. So maybe if I hold that up, we can get an idea of what that looks like without. Maybe it's very faint though. Will this camera do better? There we go. Alright, so that's what it looks like. The plastic's all shiny and glossy from being melted on, but there you have it. Daily clack. That can go alongside my slightly mini-sized the board and the letter A. Now, if you have a whole bunch of blanks, you want to do custom fonts, if you want to do, you know, custom logos for your own set, want to spice it up, this will do it. Just keep it under 15-20 minutes maybe if you're lucky. Play around with some settings. You know, you might get better results depending on the material and the color of the keycap. What can I say? Is it worthwhile? Something fun to play with? Yes. Something a bit more serious? No. Is it worth your money? Only you can decide what your time and frustration is worth, and if doing something like this really interests you and you want to have a bit of fun as well. So I do want to say a really big thank you to Banggood for actually sending me this to review. It's actually met my expectations. I won't say that it's exceeded my expectations, but originally when I did the first 2 videos, it was nowhere really near that. But it wasn't until I started playing around a bit more that I've come to realize actually it's pretty cool. They do actually have a even beefier version, a 3-watt version. I don't know how well that one will do compared to a 2-watt, because if it's got the same overheating problems, it means your burn time might be even shorter. Or they've actually got some kind of cooling in there, or the cutout circuit's different, which will allow you to run it for a longer time frame. I don't know. Unless if Banggood send me that 3-watt, I wouldn't really be able to make that comparison. However, if you're watching Banggood, or if you guys want me to review that 3-watt unit, please leave your comments, or please let me know, and then I can show it to them and say, hey, people want to see the comparison, and maybe they'll send me one. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. So I believe Banggood is also providing me some links below for some sales, maybe a coupon code, that kind of deal. It will be in the description below, and if you think you want to get one of these, check it out and have fun. So thank you very much for hanging in and staying with me through this video the entire time. Appreciate it as always. And of course, until next time, happy clacking.